Hello, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. This is Office Hours episode number 39. Welcome back. Or, if you've just stealth checked your way in here and you've never visited the Office Hours before, let me lay it out for you. Let's talk about it. Office Hours is a show in which I take about an hour to answer 3 questions that you, my beloved fans and viewers, have submitted via my website. So we hang out and I answer them, and usually they're about role-playing games, but sometimes they're about relationships and sometimes they're about both. I'm pretty into that. We've been doing it for a while now. It is a highlight of my week. I'm glad to have you here. If you want to get involved in future episodes of Office Hours, if you want to ask me questions, I encourage it. In fact, the show wouldn't happen without it. So please go to my website, www.adam-koebel.com/office-hours. Fill out that form. Little linky there. You can use a program to record your voice. Send me that. I will put all the pieces together, and we're going to end up right here in a future episode of Office Hours. So let's get to today's questions. I've got a very big question, then I've got a medium-sized question, and then I've got a confusing small question. Let's tackle the big one first. Yeah? It's just we'll just get into the deep shit.
Hi Adam, I'm Sam. I'm new to RPGs and haven't GM'd yet, but I'm planning a campaign in D&D 5th edition. My question concerns the issue of race and racism. Is it possible, in your mind, to play a game that has races with immutable or essential characteristics and not reproduce psychological or social structures of racism? Can you use racism as a structuring device in your role-building and role-playing without sliding into essentialism? Relatedly, how do you as a GM manage player racism at the table?
So, okay. This is a big one. This is a big topic. This is a big, heavy topic, and there's lots of stuff to talk about. So this is probably going to take up the most time for today's episode, and I'm okay with that. This is a question that I think is important, and I'm excited to try to address it, and I want to get a couple of things just like right out of the way first. So, first of all, hi, I am a white person. That's me. White. Hi. Hello. Check it out. As such, racism, not a thing that affects me directly in any meaningful way. My concern, my feelings towards this topic are at a remove. It is not a thing that has ever directly fucked up my life. So keep in mind while we talk that I'm talking about this theoretically, right? I'm going to make an effort to treat this topic with as much respect and care as possible, and I do everything that I can to understand shit about the evils in the world, but I'm not out there experiencing this particular evil. So what I want to address first and foremost is that, like, this is some hypothetical stuff for me, and if you want a better point of view on these things, listen to the voices of people who have experienced it, right? Engage in conversation, but mostly just listen to people who understand racism better than I do outside of tabletop gaming. I'm going to give you the gaming angle. I'm going to give you the TRPG angle on this, but like getting aware of racism as a topic generally and in nerdy spheres, is a smart move. It's the first best piece of advice I'm going to be able to give you. Broaden the voices that you listen to. Get perspective on this shit and do that first. Also, just like support people of color in our hobby, right? The people that make games, the people that stream them, the people that play and participate in a hobby that can be, frankly, kind of bullshit from the get-go. Show up for those people. If we broaden the hobby, if we get more people playing, more diverse people playing the game, we all win. I've talked about this lots before. So in the spirit of the show, in the spirit of Office Hours, and with the intention of sharing my specific advice and experiences with y'all, I do want to talk about some of the ways that I've experienced racism interacting with RPGs and fantasy, and what I think that we can do with that as a topic, right? Now, it's a thorny issue. If you're sitting in chat now, if you are watching this on YouTube and you're feeling like weird or scared that I'm gonna like call tabletop RPGs out for being kind of racist, that is a real thing you should be feeling, but don't feel defensive about it, because here's the thing. This is something that happens. People who, for whatever reason, there are people who feel insecure when this stuff gets brought up. I think because sometimes we get scared that if the thing that we love is not socially very kind in many ways, it might not be perfect, we worry that that reflects on us. That if I say Dungeons and Dragons has a racist past, you might think, but wait, I love Dungeons and Dragons. What does that say about me? And it's okay to feel uncomfortable about this topic. It is an uncomfortable thing. But also, we're allowed to like imperfect stuff. We all do it. And we just want to make sure that we talk about ways to do it better. We want to criticize the things that we love to make them better, to work out what the shitty parts are so that what we love becomes a better thing. I care about role-playing games. And when I say there is some racist colonial bullshit in the past of our game and of our fantasy culture, I do that because I love Dungeons and Dragons, because I love fantasy. I love this stuff. It's easy to get defensive and upset and to worry about our tabletop games becoming political or wanting them just to be escapist fantasy. But the thing is, when we let topics like racism just be a thing, and we don't question them in our games, we're telling the world we don't want to put the effort in. Not talking about this stuff, and I don't mean we have to come up with a solution. We can't fix racism in tabletop role-playing games just by sitting here for 20 minutes and talking about it. I think not saying anything is a statement too, right? We talk about silence being a statement, and if the statement that we're making is it's not worth it, or I don't want that shit in my Dungeons and Dragons, then we're not doing our level best to make gaming a more inclusive space, to invite new voices into it and make it better, right? I promise you that making tabletop role-playing games better at handling racism, whether you mean your game at the table or game design generally, or just the hobby at large, I promise you that the more inclusive it is, the better and more fun it's going to be. I know that that can seem scary, but I promise. You can let non-straight people GM for you, and it'll blow your mind. You can let people of color create games and support them, and they're going to be good. Because diversity of viewpoints creates diversity of story, more story, better story. That's how RPGs work. So here's the thing. Not every game we play has to be about a big issue, right? We don't have to combat these kinds of social issues by saying every game of Dungeons and Dragons has to deconstruct racism. It's worth a thought, and that's why we're here, because Sam, thank you, asked about this. I'm not saying you have to do it, but let's talk about its place in our game, right? Because I think it's just as shitty to ignore the fact that it exists as it is to only play games about a specific topic. In this case, say, if you only ever play Dungeons and Dragons games that were about deconstructing racism, it would probably burn you out pretty fast. So let's talk about how racism affects tabletop role-playing games and what place it has at the table, right? The theoretical table that maybe it's yours or mine or any table space in the hobby. I think that there are a lot of ways to define what racism is, and so I don't want to get bogged down in semantics. I'm going to make it real clear. The kind of racism I'm talking about here is the in-setting application of structures or systems in which one group of people is discriminating, antagonizing, or marginalizing another group based on the racial differences between those two groups. And when Sam, in the question, talks about essentialism in this question, what he's referring to is the belief, often reinforced by the mechanics, that a certain race contains a universality of behavioral, physical, or cultural traits, that everyone of a certain race is a certain way, and that there are inescapable qualities that universally belong to every member of that race. All right? So essentialism, racism, we're kind of understanding where we're getting at. Essentialism is a factor or a form of racism because that kind of attitude marginalizes and reduces people to stereotypes, right? All people who are X are also Y. And if that's true, mechanically or fictionally, you're reducing those people from people to a stereotype. So how does all of this stuff factor into something like Dungeons and Dragons? And like, why even think about it, right? Well, it's a pretty common thread in fantasy that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are good guys, there are bad guys. Moral relativism doesn't really fit into most fantasy, at least of a founding sort, right? Dungeons and Dragons, Tolkien, these things contained fairly objective moral scale upon which Frodo is on one end and Mordor is on the other. And sometimes these things are represented by a divide between two fantasy peoples, right? Elves and dwarves hate each other. This is a lesson that Tolkien has taught us. They have a past of violence, and as a result have developed systemic racism against one another. Now, it's nice when they get over it to fight Mordor, but like, it's present, right? Sometimes it's humans versus everyone else. It's us and them in the sense of a lot of science fiction does this, right? Sometimes there are subdivides. Sometimes it's the Southrons are the bad guys and the Gondorians are the good guys. And we have the my team and your team depending on not just species lines, but race lines as we modern audiences understand them. Individual characters can, by way of their protagonism, manage to make the trip from one side to the other. Drizzt, for example, we see Drizzt as being initially part of an evil culture based around a subspecies of elf. And then he becomes Bruenor and Catti-brie and Wulfgar's token drow friend. But there are still easily understood lines in most of this fiction between who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And these lines are, as I said, often drawn along race. Now, mechanically, there are things in the games that we play that support and reinforce that. In Dungeons and Dragons, we can look at drow or goblins or orcs and we can say, these people are evil because the game specifically says so. Now, the GM can bend the rules and certainly PCs tend to deviate, but generally you can sleep easy on a pile of orc corpses because, you know, they're evil. This is where that essentialism starts to come in, right? All orcs are evil. And if you somehow have managed to become a non-evil orc, well, you're an outlier. You're the exception that proves the rule. In character creation, in Dungeons and Dragons, we have separation by mechanisms in which humans and dwarves and elves all have their own stats, but within their group, they're all the same. All elves live forever. All dwarves are tough and stout. All humans are flexible, I guess. Now, some of this stuff makes a kind of sense when you're measuring physical traits. There are physical differences between the species. And here's a point I'd like to make, that species is, I've said this to Sage before, we've talked about this. If we could go back and make a change to Dungeon World, it would be to move away from using race as a way to define elf, dwarf, human, halfling, right? Because those are species. It's not like Shadowrun, where they are types of human, right? They're different. Some of them can interbreed, but they're different. They're as different in some cases as like dogs and cats. Other stuff, though, makes less sense because they're cultural, like skill proficiencies that indicate to us as an audience that all members of a certain species share the same culture, which is weird. right? All dwarves learn to use masonry tools. Well, really? All of them? 100% of all dwarves ever. That doesn't seem to make sense. What develops when we treat an entire group of monsters or PC races or whatever as if they were a single unified thing is a monoculture, right? We call that a monoculture. It's boring and it's stupid because as a GM, it immediately ties your hands. A monoculture tells us that all elves are this way because all elves, no matter what, no matter where they live, no matter what circumstances they grew up in, they're in some cultural way identical. And it's reductive. And usually, unless the elf in question is a PC, we end up with these cookie cutter boring characters. You know, we can only handle Haldir so many times before we'd like something different from our elves. And we can combat that by making sure that our worlds and settings contain species that we treat as though they have diversity within and don't represent a single point on a spectrum of overall world diversity. I don't want to see just the biological differences between a wood elf and a moon elf, but show me the different kinds of moon elf. Show me the moon elves of the southern woods. Show me the moon elves of the frosty steppe, and show me how they're different. Encourage your players to do this too. Treat the monoculture the game presents not as a unified, singular, permanent thing, but as a starting point. So here's a trick that you can do to diversify your NPCs and lean away from the all dwarves love gold problem. So for every NPC, think about the ways that they are like and unlike the default that you're given in the book. Now, Dungeons & Dragons can't tell us everything about a culture or all the cultures that elves might belong to, but we can treat what it tells us as a starting point from which to deviate. It doesn't have to be huge and dramatic, but think about the cultural norms that they subscribe to and the ones that they don't. Are all elves, by default, tall and lithe and love music? So make one that's tall and lithe and kind of tone deaf, right? Or make one that's tall and lithe and beautiful, but is maybe struggling with like a weight problem. Make that litheness not so evident in this character. Give your characters room to be who they are, and don't just do it on a physical level, do this on a cultural level too. When a game tells you all characters of species X are this way, say, why? Why do that? Why not do something different? It's going to make characters and cultures that stick out in the minds of your players because diversity is interesting. Diversity can create surprise out of what might otherwise be very tedious. So consider your monocultures as they come up. And honestly, if we're rational about this, we can ask ourselves if it makes sense for a world-spanning people to all be the same. Why are the elves of Evermeet and the elves of Myth Draenor, which are on the entire fucking opposite side of the world, why are they so similar, right? Evermeet would have developed its own subcultures, and so would have Myth Draenor. So you give yourself room to play with that. Humans in real life aren't like this, and we just have one little planet and one species to work with. Why would we tie ourselves to that kind of lazy storytelling in an RPG? I think the best thing to do is look at the way the player's handbook and the monster manual describes the various races and cultures, and imagine that it's a lowest common denominator assumption that exists in the fiction. The monster manual might be what everyone on Earth believes to be true at a single glance. This is what Burning Wheel does with cultures, right? In Burning Wheel, you can say that people of the northern steppes are tall, hearty, and short-tempered. And people of the southern woods are secretive, crafty, and wise. Now, these are traits that the world has put on you, but if you don't play to those traits, if you're like, no, my character's not crafty, I'm clumsy as hell, your character will shed those cultural traits over time. Think about that in Dungeons and Dragons, and feel free to bend the rules to make it work, right? Something you can do too is encourage your players to do that drifting in character creation. If they want to switch their smithing tools proficiency for a loot proficiency to play a dwarf who just never got smithing or is part of a culture that values music over craft, encourage that shit. Let them do that. Give your players room to play characters who are an interesting reflection of the world that's around them and let that be a factor in the way that they play. Think about the tension that arrives from culture versus personal. And if you want to do an experiment, think about this for yourself. So I'm gonna give you a second to do this. Think about the way in which you personally, you viewer, I'm gonna do this for myself. Think about the way that you are like your culture. Think about the culture that you belong to. And if you said to someone, I am this, and it can be anything. It can be, I am white. I am Canadian. I am a gamer. I am a streamer. I am queer. Think about the things that identify you as part of a subculture and imagine ways in which you are like that subculture. Imagine ways that you are not, right? It's easy. You can do it for yourself. You're not a product of just the things that other people will ascribe to you culturally, racially, whatever. Why on earth would you ever let any of your characters in a game be that way? Let them be their own thing. I mean, I think that kind of tension can be really fun in a game. But let's talk about racism as an element of background in a setting or an element of play, right? So we play games about murder and mayhem, about love and violence and triumph and war and exploration and sickness and chaos and glory and sorcery and all these other big things. And I think that if we want to, we can add racism as a factor to the things that we care about in our games, right? Like it's a real cultural thing, and we can speak to it at the table. Some games, in fact, like Shadowrun, and this is probably my favorite thing about Shadowrun, right? Like there's a lot of Shadowrun that's like mishandled, and even their handling on race is like not. It could improve, but I love it for this. Games like Shadowrun are built on the idea that racism is present in the game world. It's a huge part of the setting. It's handled in varying degrees of sensitivity, but it's present. It's real. And I don't think that you could separate racism from Shadowrun and still have an experience that's authentic to the source material, right? Like if you're playing a game in which someone is playing an orc or a troll, and the humans in that setting treat them like they're equals 100% of the time, you are not playing Shadowrun as it's written. Now, Shadowrun doesn't mechanize this because it doesn't exist in a game design space that thought about that, but it's real, and you can make it a functioning part of that game. So Shadowrun makes it easy for you. I think if you're looking at any fantasy game, racism is already a part of it. Whether it's as simple as all kobolds are evil, ergo it's never wrong to kill kobolds, or the more subtle, Legolas and Gimli start off wanting to kill each other because of their race, and as they get to know each other, they become best buds. That stuff is already there. It's in Dungeons and Dragons. It's in fantasy. Racial conflict is a part of the games that we play already. And as a GM or as a player, we need to handle it in a way that's respectful and thoughtful, and we can say things about it at the table just by addressing it. So, like always, you want to talk to your players, right? Express your desire in racism being a factor in your game, right? Talk about the setting, talk about the kinds of racial tension that already exist there, and tell them that in this world, there are people who are going to hate them because they were born a troll. That's going to be part of the game. Overcoming that might be an interesting thing for their character and get them to buy in to that idea. And I'm going to suggest that if there is racism in your game and you want it to be a factor that you can explore with some nuance, here's a tip. I'm going to give you a tip for this. So don't make all the racists in your game cackling madmen, right? Don't tag it on as a way to make a character a villain. Yes, racist behavior is villainy, but don't be like, okay, racism, we're going to put that on only the worst characters, because racism is not a thing that is truly reserved for the only evil, right? It can be a core motivation for some very evil shit, but if culturally significant racism exists in your setting, there are lots and lots of regular folks who benefit from it. So this is a thing. We're going to get a little bit real here, but like, if a human kingdom is built on conquered elven land and the elves have been marginalized or repressed or pushed out of their traditional home, all of the humans who live in that land and who thrive on that land in that space become a part of the larger narrative that you're weaving about racism, right? It's not just Lord Darkraven on Castle Blood who is an evil racist because he wants to kill and enslave all of the dwarves. It's the people that live in Castle Blood Village who benefit from the mines that Lord Darktalon or whatever has like stolen from the dwarves. It's a delicate subject, and it can be hard not to play stand-in with the elements of your game, right? It can be very easy to be like, well, obviously in my setting, humans are white people and elves are black people, and we're just playing out the narrative of American culture, right? Like, introduce it as a part of your game world that means something and that you want to explore, and do so in a way that does justice, not just to the idea that racism is real and that some people experience it, but that does justice to the setting that you are creating. Handle it in an informed way as best you can. And this goes right back to what I was saying before, that you can only ever really do these things. And we've talked about this as a general topic a bunch of times. You can only ever really do justice to something by learning about it. Listen to people who have experienced these things, pay attention, and understand the topic before you just throw it in, and you're going to fuck it up. I promise. I promise you are. It's okay if you do so with integrity, if you're willing to acknowledge your mistakes, if everybody is participating in this together and working on understanding a real life thing by way of playing a game, right? Now, if you want to see an egregious example, like, I'm not going to go through a list of all the reasons where, or the places where Dungeons and Dragons has been some bullshit. But if you want to see a prime example, if anyone ever says to you, whatever, Dungeons and Dragons isn't racist, it's never been racist, I would like you to Google an image. I don't even want to show it, it's so gross, but I would like you to Google an image. Look for the cover art for the Dungeons & Dragons adventure, Drums on Fire Mountain. Just go ahead and Google that. And then come back here and tell me the Dungeons & Dragons has not had a racism problem. So I think the thing is here is that remember that your game is about exploring things. And while you might think that it's interesting and fun to explore racism, there may be people at your table for whom that is a daily struggle. It is an experience that they have in their life. So talk to your players. Talk to them. Make sure that this is a thing that they are interested in doing. Get them on board, and then you'll be able to explore it with them. And then as for player racism, I mean, I got to assume you're talking about character racism, because if you have players at your table who are being racist, tell them to quit that shit or get the fuck out, right? Like, I have to assume that you mean characters here. So I think that exploring a character's racial bias, a character's opinions and feelings about other races is interesting and cool as long as we treat it like what it is, something to be overcome, as long as we treat it like something to be understood and moved past, and not like a good thing, you know? Like, there is enough shitty glorification of racism in the real world. We don't need to reward it in Dungeons and Dragons. So if a player wants to play someone whose racial perspective excuse me, deserves a little bit of adjusting, well, that's fine. That's fine. It's cool, but don't make them the hero because of it, right? Excuse me. The player should be talking with a group too, right? Letting them know, hey, so I want to play a character that has this major grudge against the people of Carthene, or this kingdom of Carthene that you know, I don't like them. I don't like Carthenians because I have this tragic backstory, and I'd like to bring that out during play. But at least at the outset, my character is he's got some problems, And I want to work that out. I want to explore that at the table. And y'all as a group can work out if that's okay for you and for this game. And if the game is going to help you, right? Like there are some games that are going to help you explore social issues better than others. In D&D, the game is not there to help you explore racism. You can do it as a group, but you are out of the player's handbook's hands, right? And I think you should try to play a game that explores these things, even explicitly, right? Like, don't try to use Dungeons and Dragons. Play Dog Eat Dog, right? Dog Eat Dog addresses colonialism and racism directly. Try that. See how that feels, because that's gonna hit you where you live, right? So, with a little bit of effort, I think that we can do this, right? But ultimately it goes back to the idea that we're playing with a very delicate thing. And I think that it's brave to take risks and examine real social stuff through role-playing games, but it's got to be a thing that everybody is interested in. And your game setting needs to either support the exploration of that, or you need to hack it to do so. Because I don't think Dungeons and Dragons is going to do you any favors, right? It's a colonialist, murder all the green races mess, but you don't have to play into that. Acknowledge that all fantasy contains some degree of racism, unless it's trying actively to take that shit apart. You know, I mean, if you want to see, there are people, there are authors, for example, fantasy authors, that are doing a good job working at some not white people fantasy, right? The Throne of the Crescent Moon, awesome series. The Inheritance, anything. N.K. Jemisin does a bunch of really good work here. Check that shit out. Go back, read the works of people of color. This is what I was saying before. Support these people. And I think that we can use games to explore in the same way that fiction does, and diffuse some of the grosser aspects of racism in our fantasy. We can diversify and celebrate nuance of character. Using racism as a thematic element to explore in our games, we've got to do so smartly. But just remember, when you go into your game, unlike a red dragon burning your house down, racism actually affects and harms people. Handle with care. All right? Handle with care. It's fucking scary stuff. And this is only like the very tip of this topic's iceberg. And I am not going to be the person to like really best vocalize this stuff. All I can do is share what I think about it, and try to boost people who are smarter and more experienced than me. So go out there, do some learning, follow some people on Twitter, get in it. Let's talk about something that I am much more qualified to discuss.
Hey Adam, this is Vaughn. I've been running a Stars Without Numbers game, and along the way, one of my PCs has decided to start a romantic relationship with an NPC. I want to showcase that and allow it to be an interesting area for character development for their character, and perhaps for the rest of the party as well. My question is, do you have any tips for dealing with romance in RPGs, either between two PCs or a PC and an NPC?
Yes, Vaughn. Yes, I do. I have many thoughts and feelings about smooching. Let's discuss player-on-player smooching. So, my tips for dealing with romance in role-playing games is do it. Yeah. Just get your characters, just mush them together, make them, yeah, because it's hot. Listen, I know that I think most role-playing games are about getting money and fucking lasering people to death, but like, God, I'm so much more interested in who's in love with who, right? I can't help it. I can't. Like, I am inherently a very, like, relationship-oriented person, and this kind of content just gets to me. I mean, okay, lasers are a great backdrop for this stuff. Just ask Sears Photo Studio. But like, the meat of characterization is the relationships between any two characters, right? And I think, and I'm gonna throw some credit to fandom here. I think that shipping as a fandom exercise has really opened the doors on this. I'm gonna straight up like shipping. Ooh, you did it. Hear me out. So here's how it works. So if you're not familiar, the idea of shipping comes from various fandoms, and their attachment to the idea that relationships, real or imagined, are things between two characters that one or more characters that one can become very fucking attached to, right? The word comes from relationship, and it's about getting invested either in the canonical stuff between characters, so like getting really invested in Willow and Terra, or using non-canon but perhaps inferred clues to build a case for a non-canon relationship, say like Harry and Draco. Now, there isn't necessarily a direct correlation between like anime fans deciding which giant robots would fuck which other giant robots and role-playing games, but I think that fandom and pop culture generally is becoming more and more aware of character relationships and the building thereof. Fandom isn't new, shipping isn't new, but the internet has made it accessible and easy to understand to way more people. There isn't a single show that I've been on that involves role-playing characters that someone has not shipped together in some fashion or another. It's an important part of the way that a lot of people interact with fiction now, and your players at the table are probably doing this. So the thing is, Stars Without Number isn't inherently going to give you tools for creating or managing those relationships, but your players are probably bringing some shipping energy into the campaign. And I think this is fascinating. It's cool there's a term for a thing that's been happening in fandom forever, and I welcome it at the table at role-playing games, because unlike watching old episodes of Buffy, hoping that Xander and Oz will start sucking face, we can actually make that shit happen. Imagine. It's fucking magical. Our characters can do whatever we want them to do, and romantic content in a game is really cool and fun to explore, or it can be, if your players are into it. Because, same as anything else, you want to let the players who are into certain stuff explore that stuff and get invested in it, and let the players who aren't as into it do their thing too. Now, ideally, the game you're playing would have some flags for that. Players would be able to show you the relationships they want to pursue, and there are not a lot of games that aren't explicitly about romance that have those mechanisms, that have those flags. Now, I think you can do romance pretty easily in, say, like Monster Hearts, right? Awkward teenage boning is mechanized in that game in several ways. I wouldn't say that sexual content or romantic content is even optional in Monster Hearts. Even playing an aromantic or asexual character, you are surrounded by hormonal teenagers who are not like you, and you come face to face with that content. It's part of the game. In Apocalypse World, there's stuff that happens when two characters bone down, and you can certainly make the seduce move to help that along, but I would say it's a product of the fiction in Apocalypse World, and not an explicit thing that you necessarily have to pursue. I got in a long argument at Gen Con once with Kira, who you've probably seen around. She's on Steven's Pendragon game. Kira and I had an argument about whether or not the sex moves were an optional part of Apocalypse World. I won't get into that now. You can guess what I thought. But Stars Without Number does not give a shit. It does not give a shit mechanically, which means it's up to you and your players and your GMing to handle how to make this stuff interesting in the narrative. So let's take a moment to discuss your job. Oh, Stars Without Number Game Master. Your job, as we've discussed before, in a game like this is to create and populate a sandbox environment with lots of shit for the players to get involved or interested in. It's not your job to frame scenes. It's not your job to create encounters. It's not your job to push the situation of the game toward any particular thing. It's your job to know what is where and why it's there. And what it's going to do, right? The PCs will follow their hearts or genitals to the romance as necessary. So when a character starts getting interested in an NPC, if you're lucky, they're going to mechanize that themselves. You can't force this, but if you're lucky, they're going to write a goal about that character. Now, you want to see an example of me doing this thing in a game that's not about romance, that doesn't mechanize romance in any way? And I think y'all know who I'm about to talk about. If you want to see me doing this as a player, watch the Bloodletters game, formerly the Six Towers gang. It's the game that I play of Blades in the Dark with John and Strash and Sean. And my character, Cantor Haig, spent most of the first part of the game being a pretty good Blades PC, right? Getting money, shooting a motherfucker or 12, whatever. But there was a point in the game where I met someone. Old Captain, what's her face? She's got a name. I can't remember what it is. Lily? Lulu? Kenji? I seriously, I can never remember. So I decided at that point, I was like, damn, Cantor wants a piece of that action. And I explicitly told John this would be a part of my plan going forward. He used the game's mechanics to create a countdown clock for me, and away we go, right? My romance is a project now. Nudge your players that way. Say, hey, you know what? I see that you're getting interested in this character. You could get some XP if you write a goal about this NPC you're so keen on, and let the game help work them towards that. Let the game reward them for that thing. The other thing you can do is make the NPCs matter, right? Like, if the person that they are in love with is just some rando asteroid farmer from the butt end of the Nowhere Nebula, they're not going to come up again. You can be like, I love you. And they're going to be like, awesome, I'm not leaving my farm, right? The players are probably getting into these NPCs because they're cool and interesting, and you should run with that, right? Tie them into a faction, tie them into a situation that the players care about. Not just the player that wants to bone them, but the other characters too, right? This is going to help you avoid the problem where you have a romance subplot where Captain Sexy Pants spends 4 sessions trying to woo General Petticoats and everyone is just sadly staring at their to-hit bonuses, waiting to laser someone to death, right? Make these NPCs interesting in the world for more reasons than just they hot, I want to do, right? Obviously, their hotness and their doability and their like interestingness as NPCs that are a romantic character, that's all really important, but make them interesting as people too, because that's why we like people. That's why we get invested in them in the first place. If your PCs are getting all ooh la la with one another, these are your players handing you a beautiful, fragile gift. They've made a statue. It's a fucking Fabergé egg full of experience points here. Because what they're doing is they're saying, we want this thing to be in the game, and you are getting to say, oh, really? Because what if this happened? Your job, if your PCs are interested in each other, is to find ways to complicate that relationship. Give them lots of reasons to be together, and then give them reasons not to be. Let them discover each other's dark secrets and ask questions about whether or not they should actually be engaging in this inter-party fucking. Give them drama, but let them be special for one another too. Let them have the victories they've earned. Think about, how is this game, how is this world, how is this campaign different now? Because you are not alone. It's one thing to be a 5th level fighter and to have killed 1,000 orcs, but it's a whole other thing to be a 5th level fighter who's killed 1,000 orcs who is in love with the rogue in the party. Being in love with someone fucks up the whole way you think about your life. And it doesn't have to be a big, dramatic, like romantic Hallmark horseshit normative thing. It can just be a paradigm shift, because for you as a GM, it allows you to ask questions that will let you learn about what love feels like for these characters. And holy shit, that's some good stuff, right? When the players make a declarative statement like, I care about this person, you are now in a magical place where you can get your hands dirty, right? PC on PC romance is 1,000 complicated triangles waiting to happen. Just put an NPC in there. Put a disapproving parent, put a romantic rival, put like, there's just so much opportunity for good story here. And however these triangles or rhombuses or hexagons take shape, they're rife for drama and excitement. And here's the thing. Treat romance in your game the same way you would treat anything else the table is interested in. It's an opportunity to explore something cool, but don't push it on people who don't want it. Let it happen organically. Talk about your players with it, and then give it some space to breathe. Use it to ask questions about the world, about their players, about the characters. Like, get at it, because it's meaningful, right? Even if, as I said before, even if we are aromantic, even if we are asexual as people, as players, even if we are monogamous or non-monogamous or straight or queer or whatever, we interact with sex and romance in some way in our lives. It is a fundamental element, either by omission or by existence, in the human experience. So why the fuck would our characters be exempt from that? Embrace it. Go with it. Love. Or hate it. Just play it in your game. It'll be cool, I promise. Just handle it with care, like you do with everything else, because you're a good game master.
Hi, Adam. I was wondering if you could advise me on, well, how to deal with a player that has a tendency to overdescribe or redescribe a situation that I've set out. This is a problem because this leads my other players to miss important details that I am emphasizing for them to focus on. This generally results in one of three things. Either I have to redescribe the situation, sometimes more than once as he continues to redescribe what I'm describing, which can waste a lot of time or end up with, then the second thing, players missing what I'm trying to emphasize and resulting in having, well, bad things happen to them as the situation is planned. This can lead to them telling me that I'm not emphasizing the important parts of the situation enough, or sometimes it can lead to other characters feeling like they don't have enough spotlight, not being overspoken by the player in question. This tends to be problematic as they talk to me afterwards and feel uncomfortable. I have spoken with the other player about this before, and it worries me having to, reiterate it or say it again to them because I feel like I'm sort of squashing their character agency by stopping them. I just wanted to know, is this my problem? Is it the player's problem? Or is it a group problem that we need to deal with and look at? And, just generally, what angle should I approach this from? Thanks very much for taking your time to listen to this.
So I'm gonna tease you. I'm gonna tease you for a second, Hobo Float. I really like that the question about verbosity was almost 2 minutes long. I'm just gonna just poke a little fun at you there. Thank you for this question, Hobo Float. It's weird. It's weird as fuck. This sounds to me like a strange problem to have. Now, not to say that it isn't vexing as hell, but I feel like I'm missing some crucial information. Like, you said you've spoken to your player before. Why are they doing this? I hope that's a question you asked them and you didn't tell. If you don't know, go ask. Because why? Why are they doing it? Right? Are they just okay, I sat in front of this question. I almost didn't answer it because I couldn't get my head around it. And I sat down when I listened to this and I was like, what is even happening here? Are they just saying back what you're saying to them at the table? Like when you say, you enter a cave, there are 5 goblins here. Do they say, we're in a cave with 5 goblins? Like they're a character in a Hideo Kojima game? Like what's actually going on where your player is parroting these descriptions back to you? Now, unless this is a thing that you already know and didn't mention, I would start there. Like go ask them. Be like, what? Okay, so dude, when I describe things, you seem to just repeat what I say or rephrase it. And it's super not necessary to have an echo on this. Why is this? Why are you doing that? And they might have an explanation. They might not. They might not know why they're even doing it at all. They might not notice it. And if that's the case, at least you've brought it up. It's a thing they'll notice and hopefully be aware of. If they can't do it, if they've got no reason, you've told them about it, they're still doing it, you're going to need to take a second crack at it. But if you ask them why, there might be other reasons. Let me posit a few. They might be repeating to confirm what you said or to help themselves understand what the situation is. It might be a long-winded form of active listening, right? When you say, you enter the room, there's slime on the walls, a bubbling cauldron sits in the corner, they might say, okay, so there's slime on the walls and the cauldron is in the corner of the room. They might be trying to confirm with you that they've heard you correctly. They might be doing it because they're anxious to get their fictional positioning right. They might be looking for an advantage. They want to describe things in a way that shows they really understand the situation so that later they can say, okay, but I confirm with you that you said that the wall was covered in slime. They might secretly really just want to be the GM, but they're too nervous to say so, right? They might be literally parroting you because they want to be the ones doing the describing. That might be happening. Whatever the reason, start by asking. Ask why this is happening and explain that you feel like it's causing trouble for your table. Be clear about your feelings and try not to be accusatory. Don't go into the conversation being like, stop it, fucking stop, you're ruining everything, you're the worst. Don't do that. That's shitty. If you can find the source of this weird behavior, you can probably help diffuse it without there being a crisis. If the problem lies in the player just generally having a George R. R. Martin tendency and describing every little thing with a 10-minute soliloquy, you can just flat out address that. You can be like, hey, so listen, I get that you're really into the detail that you're putting into the game, describing the grains of sugar atop the glistening yellow lemon tart that you've driven from the oven with a wooden paddle that you crafted yourself with an iron. Like, just stop. Like, we get it. The level of detail you're putting into this stuff is not giving anyone else a reason to talk. You are describing the whole game for us. This is a communal effort. Everybody would like to be able to participate. Try, instead of ripping that soliloquy down, posit a question. Less is more. Why don't you say, my character has made some delicious lemon tarts. What does the smell remind you of? Like, give them a little bit of stuff that they can like nudge in there as the co-GM if they're in that position where they're like afraid to GM or whatever. But you can honestly just straight up say like, hey, it sounds like you kind of want to be able to do the describing thing. Would you like to try GMing? Like, let's play some award-winning tabletop role-playing game, Dungeon World, shall we? I hear its creators are very handsome. You might like this game. You could GM. It can be hard to discourage a thing that often, as GMs, we are taught to desire, right? We do not want a player to say, I hit him with my sword. I make him a tart. But there's a degree to which that can become disruptive, right? Description porn is a thing in tabletop games, and love them though I do, Patrick Rothfuss, George R. R. Martin, fucking Lovecraft, have all given us bad habits as tabletop game players if we look to their fiction as an example of how to describe. And if you're finding yourself in that position where your player is just over-describing shit, talk to them. Work with the player to find the cause of the problem and come up with solutions together. Ways that this player can continue to feel creatively engaged, but in a way that isn't going to fuck up your entire dynamic. Role-playing games are a communal effort, and everyone at the table should work together to make them fun and engaging. And don't immediately shut this person down, because you might be killing a beautiful butterfly by stepping on this caterpillar, right? Find out what's happening here, and like a good friend, use that to improve your game, right? Listen to them. They want to creatively be a part of the game. Help them be non-disruptive. And I'm wondering about this. So you mentioned something about emphasis, and I want to talk about emphasis in description. So y'all have played role-playing games or watched other people play role-playing games. This is a thing that happens. And tell me if I'm wrong on this, but the GM is sometimes in this weird place where people really listen super hard to us, expecting that the things that we say are all relevant to the plot, right? When you describe something, do not your players gravitate towards some meaningless detail because they think, oh, hey, he said that the water was greenish blue, right? I kind of love when players expect that stuff because it means I can let them go off on 3 sessions on a side quest for something that I just mentioned in passing for color. You enter the tavern. The man by the bar is wearing a floppy felt hat. He scowls at you before drinking his beer in one gulp and leaving. Now, I know the guy in the floppy felt hat just doesn't like wizards. But now the players are going to be like, wait a second, who is this floppy-hatted fool? And they're going to spend, a session trying to track him down. And that's fine. You can do that. But like the players, some players, not all of them, have this thing where they just like latch on to something. And you can really have fun with that. But it can also be very derailing. And this is the expectation of emphasis, right? I suppose that kind of weird listening for keywords it's a form of metagaming, really. Listening to your GM only with the expectation of finding things of value. Kind of GMing is weird. And on the player side, it's even weirder. It's like playing a shitty adventure game. I walk up to the NPC. Tell me about gangs. Oh, I don't know anything about gangs. Tell me about Maria Mercurial. Well, I heard she's having a concert at Club Penumbra. Tell me about Club Penumbra. It's a weird business. It's a real weird business. I mean, talk to your players about that too. Let them know that you're sometimes describing things just to give them space to imagine the world. Everything you say is important, but it might not be important to the plot. Also, fuck the plot. The plot is whatever happens in the game. There's no such thing as inconsequential information because it all contributes to the over idea of the space the games are in and the kinds of things they might explore. But verbosity, whether yours or this mimicking player, it's an important element to keep in check, no matter who you are. Consider that economy and what fits for your game group. If your whole group, and I know it's not, but in theory, for someone who's not you, Hobo Float, if your whole group is a bunch of verbose poets, oh God, I can't imagine, but good, have fun. Right? We can't all be fucking T.S. Eliot of the tabletop. But if everyone in your group is, fucking rock and roll. Bust out that Lord Byron and get it done. But there is an economy, there's a cadence, there's a pace to every game table, and finding yours and helping everyone fit together into it, that's going to make it work. And I am not sure what is up with your player here, but I hope you get it figured out. Go talk to them. Ask. It's legit, it's that easy. You can do it, I believe in you. Thank you for coming, everybody. This has been Office Hours episode number 39. As always, I love you very dearly, and I hope that Office Hours is making you better game masters, or at least giving you some stuff to talk about. This episode was an interesting one for me, and I feel like we broached a topic that I care a great deal about, but that I am not adequately capable of going into. So please, please go out there, listen to the voices of people who know these things more than I do, and learn. Because you're only going to be a better person. You're only going to be a better game master. It's going to be some good shit. I promise. Now, if you want to talk about queer people in role-playing games, damn, I am all over that. So if you have a question about something that I can address directly, go on over to www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. Fill out that form, record your voice, or have a ringer do it for you. And I will get around to your question in the order in which it was submitted. We've got tons more questions. We have many more weeks of sweet, sweet Office Hours ahead of you. And I hope that I will see you again next week for Office Hours episode number 40. I've been Adam Koble. You've been you. I will see you next time.